Hi, this is S.G. Brownlow. So, if you saw my video last week, I talked about the introverted part of being a sensitive introvert and how being around other people sometimes was very wearing because it seemed like people were constantly trying to tell us who we are and define us, and that can be very wearing and difficult. Now, if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend it because it might help make a little more sense of this. But this week, I want to talk about the flip side of that. I want to talk about the sensitivity part of being a sensitive introvert, because I think this is really where we run into problems. And it's because we, as sensitive introverts, have not been trained very well about how to deal with emotions, and particularly how to deal with empathy and what empathy really is. Now, there's a lot of funny ideas about empathy running around, and most of the stuff that you read about empathy is stuff like, well, I hear your story and I imagine myself being in your story, and I put myself in your shoes and I imagine how you might feel, and I ask you some questions about how you might feel, and that helps me understand where you're at. And I just want to say that as a sensitive introvert, I never had to go through all that, and I'm guessing that you probably never did either. And there's a good reason for that. And that is because one of the things that's involved in empathy is actually the mirror neurons in the motor cortex. And if you've been paying attention to science probably in the last dozen years, you've probably heard of mirror neurons. But essentially what mirror neurons are neurons that fire when other people are doing things. And so, for instance, if you're watching someone digging a hole, then certain neurons in their motor cortex are firing, but similar neurons, sort of paired neurons in our own motor cortex are firing. And so it's like we're digging the hole even though we're not doing the work. We're just watching them dig the hole, and we're seeing how hard the work is, and we're seeing what motions they're going through, and we're in some ways experiencing it along with them. Now, if you think about it, this is how everybody learns to imitate other people. And so little kids have to learn how to throw a ball, how to jump rope, how to walk, how to skip, how to jump, and they do that by watching other people, and then they don't have it perfect the first time, but they usually have a pretty good sense of what to do by imitating other people. And so we can all go out and watch other people do, say, a dance move as we get older, and if we want to learn the dance move and we're really paying attention, then maybe we can go do that dance move. Well, if you think about emotions are very much motor. There's a lot of motor involvement in emotions. There's posture, there's breathing, there's facial expression, there's action. All of that is bound up in the motor cortex. And so there's specific kinds of behavior that go with emotion, with each specific emotion. So there's one set with anger and one set with sadness and so on and so forth. And what we also know is that all of that is networked together with our feelings, with our motivations, with our thoughts, with whatever. And so when we start feeling or we start doing the motor stuff, we start feeling, we start getting motivated. If we start doing the feeling stuff, then the motor stuff all comes in and the thoughts come in. You can start anywhere, and all of those things get networked in together. And so what ends up happening is if we view someone being sad, for instance, and we view their posture and their breathing and their motor behavior and listen to the sound of their voice, and they do all of that kind of stuff, then pretty quickly we start feeling a reflection of what they're feeling. Now, that works really well if we're one-on-one and we're maybe a friend or a therapist or somebody like that, because we really understand what our friend is going through. But only if the second part is also working, the second part of empathy, and that is a little piece of our brain that's kind of over here, a little above our ear, and it's called the right temporoparietal juncture. It's where the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe meet on the right side. And deep in the folds of the brain there's a little structure that develops at about age 4. It starts to really come online and get a lot of power. And that is where we have a fairly localized sense of ourselves. And this is me. This is not me. And so we have to have both of those for empathy to work. We have to be able to not only feel what other people are feeling, but we also have to realize that's not me. So if I'm with the one person who's feeling very sad and they're a friend or they're a client or something, and I can feel it, but I can realize, okay, they're overrun with sadness, but that's them. It's not me. If I were feeling this way, what would I do to help myself? Then maybe I can help my friend. Now, if I get lost in their sadness, then I'm not going to be any help. And a lot of times we kind of know that, but a lot of times it's very difficult when we get in a crowd of people because we have a lot of conflicting emotions in a crowd that we have to deal with, where everybody we turn to is different, and it gets overwhelming and confusing because this person might be sad and this person is anxious and that person is angry and this person over here is scared and this one over here is just has a lot of different things going on, and it's all a jumble and it's all conflicted, and it's just kind of they're overwhelmed and so we're overwhelmed. So what the part of that keeps us from having these kind of relationships with crowds of people is our inability to realize and hold in mind who we are and where we stop, and to hold the rest of it in suspension and realize, okay, this is not about me. This is not a definition of me. This really has nothing to do with me except that I'm in the middle of this crowd, and maybe if I can pull one person aside, I can relate to them, but trying to relate to this whole crowd of people is probably going to be overwhelming until I get very, very good at holding my ground and noticing who I am and how I differ from the crowd. So that's really how sensitivity plays against us when we're in crowds of people, because the sensitive person really is good at the mirror neuron part, and they have more trouble with the this is where I end and this is where someone else begins part. They're good at what we would think of traditionally as the feminine parts of it, where we're here to understand how other people feel and take care of other people's feelings. But they're not as good at the masculine part of this is where I end and this is where you begin and this is the task that we have to accomplish together. They're not as good at that part. But that skill is learnable. And that's something that I help people with a lot. So I hope you have enjoyed this little 2-part series on what a sensitive introvert is, how I define a sensitive introvert, and really why I think they have a lot of untapped strength. Because when they do learn how to separate themselves from other people and how to separate themselves from some of their own emotionality, I'm firmly convinced that sensitive introverts are much, much closer to realizing their values and really becoming the person that they want to be than really anybody else in the world. So I hope you've enjoyed this series. If you have, leave me a comment down below. Give me a share on social. If you have questions, ask them. You can leave a comment or email me. And I'll see you next week with another video.